have a great panel for you now, and it's about leadership and the role of leadership and what leadership can do in providing for this change and seeing the vision and for this change and what we can bring to the Richmond community from some things that have been happening elsewhere. And so we're pleased to have us today what's going to be moderating the panel, Leaders Harnessing Change from Within, Superintendent Dr. Marcus Newsome of Chesterfield County. So if we can give him a welcome and have him come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and thank all of you for remaining all the way through this final session.
That's right.
As Tom just referred to you earlier to me, this is the hardcore group. Mm-hmm. You are serious about the business of equity and doing what's right for our young people, and so thank you so much for being here. I do have the pleasure of moderating this session. I am the superintendent of Chesterfield County Public Schools, which is a bordering school division here next to Richmond. We have a little over 58,000 students, and I noticed in the audience that we have some of our employees from Chesterfield County. So I'm not going to embarrass you too much, but would you just wave at me? Okay.
Wow. Good.
You get extra points for staying here. This has been a very serious discussion, but I would like to just take a moment, a lighthearted moment, for just a bit, and then we're going to get into the meat. And I was thinking about children. I always try to reflect on some of the funny things that children say to keep focused on the main purpose of our work. And so I thought about this interview that Art Linkletter had with a 7-year-old about 40 years ago. And I was reminded of it when they announced the Pope yesterday, and congratulations to all the Catholics in the house. So Art Linkletter is interviewing this little girl, and he says, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? No, that's another interview. This interview, he says, do you want to get married? And she said, yes. So he said, what are the qualities of a good husband? And she said, well, he has to have lots of money, he has to love horses, and he has to let you have 22 children. And Art Linkletter says, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she says, a nun. Okay. They say the darndest things, don't they?
That's right.
Well, with us today for this session, we have 3 outstanding leaders. You heard a little bit about them from Kim. These are people who have walked the walk. They've not just talked the talk. And they have made it part of their life's work to bridge achievement gaps and equity gaps in education. So I'll just share a brief introduction for our 3 panelists. First, starting with Melissa Krull, who is the former superintendent of Eden Prairie Schools in Minnesota. She's widely known for recently leading a school integration initiative which intentionally eliminated racial and local income segregation for all elementary students, while at the same time closing achievement gaps among those students. She is currently working at the Minnesota State University, Mankato, teaching education leadership courses for incoming school leaders. She is also the co-chair of the Board of School Superintendents and consults with school districts on equity initiatives to eliminate racial achievement gaps, leadership achievement gaps, and teaching achievement gaps. Please show a warm Richmond welcome for Dr. Prairie. Next, we have with us Dale Burns, and I just met him for the first time and found out that his cousin is my doctor. I don't think that's going to get me a discount on my insurance, though. He is the founder and director of GMK, which provides consulting services to leaders in large and small public school districts, as well as rural and urban districts across the United States. He developed special projects with superintendents and administrators, both school-based and central office administrators, school boards, and philanthropic organizations, as well as advocacy groups. Prior to founding GMK Educational Services, he served as the superintendent there and in Wake County Schools in North Carolina, which probably has about 150,000 students. And he just accomplished some monumental work there, and so we're really looking forward to hearing from Dale. And then finally, we have one of Richmond's own, Don Coleman. He was initially elected to the Richmond City School Board in 2008, re-elected in 2012, and now serves as the vice chair of the board. He is a lifelong resident of Richmond, graduated from Richmond Public Schools. He attended Virginia Commonwealth University, and then he was called into the ministry. And he has experienced many of the challenges that young people experience today by growing up in a foster home. He clearly understands the challenges of coming from a disadvantaged background, and he has a personal conviction to bridging the equality gap in our nation. He continues to work and build relationships across cultural and ethnic lines throughout the area and to ensure joy and justice within our community. Let's show a round of applause to him as well. Each of them will make some opening comments, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions, and we will start with Dr. Krull.
Good afternoon. You are the hardcore crowd because we've been watching you all day. So I'm just glad that you stayed. And it's so nice to be here because there's so many people, and this is really singing to the choir. And after you haven't sung to the choir, it's very nice to sing to the choir sometimes. So it's really nice to be with you because we know you're here and you're on a mission of your own. And my goal, I was asked to just, start out by just kind of telling the story. Well, my story is a long one, so I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I just brought some artifacts that I'll show you, so it's not really a PowerPoint, but there are some pictures, I think, that might just add some depth to the story. But the bottom line for me is that even though the journey is hard, and you know that I am a superintendent, but I'm not running a school district right now, and there was a long and tough journey, but what I want to be sure you leave with is to know that it was worth every single bit of the effort and time that we all dedicated to it. I would do it in a heartbeat again. Wow. So I just have to start with that because I want to leave you with a sense of hope, not with a sense of discouragement, but part of the story is a bit discouraging. But really and truly on the other side is only hope and possibility from my vantage point. So I want to say it that way. And I want to start with this image for you. I hope it shows up well, but I'll just describe some of the small print in case you can't see it. When I finished my work in Eden Prairie, what you're looking at is a gap chart, and it's the way that we showed data in terms of what was happening in our school district. And by the way, my district that I was leading around racial equity and school integration was a 10,000 student suburban school district, conservative, wealthy, largely Republican community. And I had been their superintendent for 10 years, but I was I had been in the district for 28 years. So I had 10 years to really do the kinds of things I was thinking about. When I left, this gap chart basically shows the progress over time with just some of the groups, not all of the groups. But you can see where we started out in 2008 and the kind of progress we made. By the time we had finished our work, at least I had finished my work, we had narrowed the gap between black students and white students by 42%. And other gaps had narrowed as well. We don't have our Native American students on this chart because we didn't have enough students to document on the MCA test. However, the gap there was wide as well, and we were making progress with them, although not as quickly. So when we left, we were on really quite a trajectory in terms of making great progress for kids. And there's sort of that's the end, right? The end is I left the district in October, which is almost 18 months ago now, on agreement with my board. I had asked to separate from them, and we came to an agreement and I left. But the trajectory was really good, and there was a lot that went into that. So one would think that that's good news when you think about it. When you look and see what's happening for kids, one would think, who would argue with such a thing? But I go to the comment that John made this morning and earlier. John Maciel from Omaha used the quote, "The closer you get to equity, the sooner sooner the rules change." And I use that quote too because there's nothing more true. So I want to show you this picture. And this one, I didn't actually make this slide, but one of my employees made it, and she's also a parent in the district. And if you can see the small print, she'd sort of just compared an image back in the 60s when Ruby Bridges was attending her school for the first time in New Orleans, and the response that was given to her, and really what that family went through when that little girl tried to go to school, in an all-white school. And sort of jump forward to 2011, and you see people in a community so angered by an integration effort that they're sort of acting in the same way. So why are they protesting? They were actually protesting me in this picture, and so I use it as curriculum now, you know. But that's that larger picture that you see. I think it's to your right. Says Superintendent Krull, be a leader and send your child to Forest Hills. So what they're angry about is that we had redrawn our boundaries basically to balance our schools by low income. And so we are, just so you get the perspective, we are a 6x6, 6 mile by 6 mile, 36 square mile community, right? And the schools were becoming racially segregated and isolated as we continued to be more and more diverse. We were not historically, but we were really very, very quickly changing racially. And so the isolation and the segregation was really emerging in one of our schools, and several of our schools were really racially isolated as white schools. So this we saw as an interference and something that was going to slow this trajectory down. And so we were very intentional about changing that. And years of work got us to this point, but the integration effort would be the only thing that would allow us to keep moving and to keep narrowing and ultimately eliminating the gap. So the map that came from this work is here, and I hope you can see the colors. Basically, the colors, this is the map for a 6x6 square mile community. Kind of salmon, pink, green, blue, and yellow. I guess that's how it looks on my screen. But nobody was driving more than 2 miles further from their home neighborhood school. And bus rides became shorter and transportation costs went down. So this was the resulting anger that came from this work. And along with it came a lot of other things in the middle, such as petitions for my removal, along with blogs and Facebook pages and restraining orders. You know, all of those things came as a result of trying to move kids. So we did end up moving them, and I want you to know the end is good. In December of 2010, I've lost track of the year already. The board voted by a vote of 4-3 in favor of the new boundary map, and so the integration effort went forward. And the disparity between schools at the time was about 42%. So some schools were as low as 10% in terms of their percentages of students of low-income kids, and other schools were about well over 50% in terms of their percentages of low-income kids. This map that I showed you brought the balance down to a difference of no more than 10%. So no school was more than 10% with a percentage of low-income children. And the map went forward, and the board voted in favor of it on a 4-3 vote. And last fall, a year ago last fall, the students all moved to their new schools. And then I left about 4 weeks later. So the good news is the results were good, the kids moved, and by the way, they're doing great. They're really, really doing well. In the middle, things like this happened, which I think is not helpful, but it is the reality of the work. And one of the questions they asked us is, how did the media work to support you, or how did the media work not to support you? And really the answer is both. So these kinds of things happened, and organizations formed, and litigation emerged, and the media, you know, printed all kinds of stories that were not true, and then there were some reporters that printed things that were really helpful. You know, all of this came in the process. This is a copy of the article where the parents decided to try to sue us, which never actually came to fruition. But there was a lot of threats and a lot of angst around that. But in the end, the board approved the decision, and they went forward, and the kids are doing great. And they are in integrated schools, and everyone I speak with tells me that the kids are doing great. Even the parents have calmed down. But the kids are doing very well, and from my vantage point, it was absolutely worth it. Today, I prepare principals and superintendents for licensure, and we talk about this stuff all the time, and I use a lot of the work of the people that have spoken to you today in preparing superintendents and principals to be prepared for this kind of hardcore work that's super important for our kids if we wanted to continue to get the kinds of results we know we need in our schools. So I say it's worth it, and everybody should engage in it. So thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
A standing room only crowd had gathered for the Wake County Board of Education's December 1st, 2009 meeting, which was the first for 4 newly elected board members. The election campaign had pitted supporters of a long-standing district-wide policy promoting socioeconomic diversity against supporters of neighborhood schools. That swearing-in ceremony marked the beginning of a new era in the Wake County public school system. At the conclusion of the swearing-in ceremony, the chair called a recess to signal the start of a reception to honor the new board members. Hundreds of supporters were on hand for the event. They lined the walls of the boardroom and spilled into the hallways, and most of them had never been in the boardroom before. The meeting was resumed following the reception with what appeared to observers to be routine board business. And because one of the departing board members had served as a vice chair, the printed agenda included the election of a new vice chair. A newly elected member was nominated and quickly elected, which foreshadowed events to come. Never suspecting a tsunami of change that was about to sweep over the board chair then called for the approval of the meeting agenda. And little did he know that the first wave of change would culminate with him being ousted that evening as chair. The formerly lone minority member of the board, now the de facto member of the new majority, made a motion to amend the agenda. And the motion proposed adding 8 items. Not one of the items was listed on the printed public agenda prior to the meeting, and no materials were provided in advance to the public, to the superintendent, or the board. Those newly added agenda items really weren't surprising in themselves, as the criticism of the board and its policies dominated the election campaign, and nonetheless, the speed with which they were announced and the manner with which that majority took control shocked most of the folks in the audience. The 4 former majority board members had little choice but to sit and watch as a motion was made, seconded, and approved 5-4 to elect a new board chair. And when the gavel was handed to the new chair, the 7 remaining new items were also added. And they were presented one by one, each by a new member of the board. Each of those 7 motions was adopted by a 5-4 vote. At that point, it was clear that this was more than just the planting of a new majority flag on the Wake County Board of Education. In just a matter of moments, the new board had ousted the chair, and they approved resolutions that radically changed long-standing policies and practices. And in doing so, they made good on a number of their campaign promises. At that point, the question for a lot of folks was, how could this happen? Well, all of the 9 seats on the Wake County Board of Education are elected by district, and there are no at-large seats. Citizens can vote only for the representative, the candidate in their district. And during that particular election cycle, a block of 4 candidates emerged, and the candidates ran together on a single platform. And though the Board of Education elections are officially nonpartisan, a major political party and same-leaning political action committees provided endorsements and financial support to that block of 4. And in addition to the PAC and party support, several prominent, wealthy individuals with similar ties also provided endorsements and financial support. So for all practical purposes, the Wake County Board of Education election had become a contentious, partisan campaign. And that block of 4 employed a very consistent message. They opposed the status quo, and they cited the failed policies of the Board of Education as they referred to the actions of that previous board. Their loudest message, however, and the one that received the greatest media attention, was a call for a system-wide move to neighborhood or community schools, which was away from the decades-old socioeconomic diversity policy in the Wake County public school system, which, by the way, was the cornerstone of the school system when it was merged from the Raleigh City and the Wake County District in 1975. It was an off-year election, and voter turnout was even lower than predicted. 7% of the voters in the 4 districts turned out to vote. Those 4 members were elected by a majority of the 7% who turned out to vote. Pressures leading to the outcome of that election have built up over time. During the preceding decade, growth in our district occurred at a breakneck pace. In some years, Wake County added over 100 new citizens every day. And for a period of 5 years, during the time I served as superintendent included, 2 complete classes of kindergarten students were born every single day in Wake County. So compounded by growth, student assignment became increasingly controversial. Parents in neighborhoods and whole communities got very frustrated with too frequent assignments. And they called for more stability and less disruption, and the voices became louder. Parental choice in neighborhood schools became the rallying cries in response to reassignment. And much of the reassignment was perceived to be the result of busing for diversity. Those passions that were raised during the campaign did not subside after the election. They actually became more inflamed. Subsequent board meetings resulted in protests, arrests at public hearings, and demonstrations during those early board meetings with the new majority in control. 3 months later, as superintendent of the district where I began as a teacher, when that district was merged in 1975, where I served most of my professional career, I resigned because I could no longer, in good conscience, serve as superintendent and carry out the initiatives of that new board. Initiatives which were designed to completely eliminate diversity from policy, especially the policy guiding student assignment in the district. Since then, a new superintendent was hired by that majority. There was an election in 2011 for those seats not up in 2009, and the results: more money spent than ever before campaigning, even in the 2009 election, and a new majority was elected. And they ran against the majority elected in 2009 and the changes they had made to the Wake County public school system. And the superintendent has recently been removed. To a lot of folks, this was not at all a surprise, especially if you think about the role of governance and public process in sustaining policies in school systems. So that's just a snippet of the Wake County story, and obviously I could speak to you all day about that. But I share that with you to provide some context for some other thoughts that I hope you'll consider. So moving forward, as you think about how diversity and integration might be supported within a school district where it currently exists, and how might it be increased in districts where it's currently lacking? Well, there's a short answer, and it really is about governance and public process with an eye towards sustainability. Public schools are much more than schools funded with public dollars. They represent core values of the public in terms of what is taught, how it's taught, by whom it's taught, who pays for what, who goes to school where, and with whom. And there's a relationship between the public and public schools in that the public is not the customer, the public's the owner. And to remain public, public schools require good governance by citizens elected to represent the interest of those owners, the public. And consequently, because we as citizens, myself included, have strong preferences for core values, there's always going to be conflict associated with public schools. Effective governance requires a desire to identify and move toward the public good, not just what's determined to be right. There are many right things, but not all of them move toward what is good. And some school board members, unfortunately, as with other elected officials at times, really don't get governing. And you can see the evidence of that as they seem to never stop campaigning. And it's important because they also sometimes don't seem to get that they are elected individually, but they have to govern collectively. Public process is an integral component of good governance. It's not enough for a board to pass motions, to approve policies, to support integration and diversity. Public process is important. And public process to create space for all the views, even the ones we don't agree with, is a critical aspect. Make no mistake, opponents of a public policy solution just don't go away once that policy is enacted. They have different visions. They don't go silent either. And with social media, their voices are actually amplified these days. We saw that in Wake County in the elections in 2009. We saw it again in 2011. There might be, and I won't explain that, but there might be an election this fall if the North Carolina General Assembly does not change an important part of the election of the Wake County Board, which is now on the table. So we may see that again. Public processes to find the good, not the right, but the good in visions of as many people as possible to develop an integrated solution, not just one that's achieved through domination or compromise, is really what's needed. So what is an integrated solution? Well, conceptually, it's when a policy solution addresses the good that you desire without harming the good that exists. And sustainability is dependent on good governance and public process. Because if governance is a zero-sum game and the goal is only on winning, 5-4, I win, you lose, then integration, diversity, whatever it might be, will neither be achieved nor sustained in the long run. Governance is directed toward determining the greater good, including the good in other visions that can be implemented without harming the good that already exists, really is the key. And public process that's inclusive, especially including those that we sometimes believe to be opponents of the vision we are pushing, thinking about, trying to achieve, is important. Employing a common language in public processes and governing can result in the realization that we might just want the same things, but we disagree on how to get them, or we disagree on the balance of those public values that compete as we look to solutions. We might just be talking past one another because we lack that common language and we lack a clear framework within which to work. And regardless, it starts with making public space for the visions of all, not just me and my vision. So there are two conclusions I'd like to share with you from my public school experience as I wrap it up. First, there are no new public problems in public schools. Only variations of the same problems we've been wrestling with since our country was founded. And here's the exciting part. We know what they are. And solutions to public problems become public problems of the future. And that's inevitable, because every generation has to struggle through the debates over the core values of liberty, equality, community, prosperity, and find the balance. And it's not fun, it's not easy, it's not pretty, but it is democratic, and it's how a public thing is defined. That work is important, and it has to continue. And at a very high level, if we truly want our democratic republic to endure, we've got to talk about, we've got to teach, we've got to model the arts of democratic governance and public process. And if public school boards, if public school leaders can't be expected to do this for the next generation of Americans, then I don't know who can. I don't believe much today we can look to Congress or many state legislatures for a model as to how democratic processes might work. So yes, you're the choir. You've hung with the whole day. You're committed. There's no question the right people are in this room right now to move this region forward. But I'm confident that there are a fair number of other right people to move the district forward who aren't in the room today. And they probably have a different vision than you might have. You need them, and they need you. We are a democratic republic, and we have to go forward thinking about that. It's not a matter of winning or even a compromise. I think sequestration tells us what compromise looks like. It's a matter of addressing good in as many visions as you can going forward. And so I'd like to leave you in the spirit of James Thurber, one of my favorite cartoonists and humorists, who said, it's better to know some of the questions than, some of the questions than all of the answers. I want to leave you with some questions to explore going forward. You've had a great start. Questions like, what purpose should public schools serve in this region? What's your vision for public schools in this region? How do you make space for the visions of others in this region? How do you engage your fellow citizens in a discussion? How do you employ a common language to find a common vision, one that's determined not through domination, not through compromise, but an integration of lots of diverse visions so that you can move toward what is good, not just what is right? Thank you very much for the opportunity. Look forward to some questions.
Come on, we can do better than that. Come on, let's clap our hands. Wow, that's all I have to say to both of you all. Wow. And so what am I doing up here? Because Kim Bridges is my friend. That's right. Be friends with Kim Bridges, you get to speak at this. But on a more serious note, I want to talk about the microcosm of this. Over in the east end of Richmond, at Chimborazo Elementary School, we are attempting to press into this. Dr. Orfield, thank you so much for last night. I just really appreciate you. Now, what's going to be hard for me in my next few moments is there are people in the room that I need to talk about. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to go ahead and call them out right now. Because as our two guests have really helped us see people who've gone before us doing something for an entire district, I'm going to zoom in on real people on the ground right this moment living in it. So I got Dr. Danny Avula over there, his precious wife Mary Kay, and Catherine Illian. Is anybody else over from our program? Wave at us so y'all see them, and during the break, be nice to them, okay? Now, if you notice on here, they put on here that I'm co-pastor. So I'm sorry, they already made you aware that I am a preacher. So I do have a dual opportunity here since they put it on here. If they had just put school board, I probably wouldn't have done it. But since they put it on here, I do want to touch that part of it. But the human factor is so important. Is there anybody else here that's considering, again, putting your child in a school that people say is underperforming, that's not racially diverse? Anybody else like that here? Okay, thank you. Okay, great. So I'll be talking to you too, because, that's what we want to do. But when you look at the human factor, when you look at, all of the wonderful things we've been talking about, all of the hard things that we've been talking about over this time, at the end of the day, what Melissa modeled to us is that at some point you actually get involved in it and people get involved in it. Oh, my. You didn't know that you got issues? You didn't know that? People have issues. And that's where and especially adults. The children would probably work with us. But as adults, we end up in conflict around a lot of things, a lot of expectations that we may have even for our children. But one of the things I've discovered is this. Everybody say all. Say it loud, all. Say all children. You see that? You see how you can easily say that? Yeah. Let me hear you say it again. All children. I'm for all children. Most of us can say that until it costs us something. And then just this week, we've been going through some challenges with what we're trying to do. Would you do this for me? Would you clap your hands? She's not here. But would you clap your hands for Principal Burke and Donna Fout, who are working with us? I want you to do that. That's the principal of Chimborazo, and Donna Fout is the PYP. We're doing an IB at an urban elementary school, and we're doing it, again, you can only do it for the whole school. And Donna Fout is working with the principal there, and Matt Illian, the task force. But when you get into the real stuff of what's happening in our urban schools and the fight that a principal has to go through, yet when you come and have to also deal with the reality of the fact that the way things are now are not that way by mistake. When I heard Dr. Orfield, and it's just wonderful, grab this book. I left it right over there by my stuff there. Thank you. Pass it to me. If you haven't read this book, Krull Wolf gave me this book, The Color of Their Skin, Education and Race in Richmond, Virginia, 1954 to 1989. And as you can see, I am an African American. I know I fooled you for a moment, probably. But when I read that book, and again, thank you, when I read that book, my initial response was to get angry. But I told you already, I'm a preacher. Now, we're supposed to be, us preachers, we're supposed to do better than getting angry. We're supposed to be looking for how to find solutions. The Avulas, the Illians, the Woodgesarias, these are people in my congregation, young white families, who are deciding to say, yes, we're gonna put our kids in Chimborazo, we're gonna press in, we're gonna go through this, and things happen. Say that, said things happen. Things happen that I don't want to happen, but they happen. And you see, courage is what it takes to do, what we've been kind of pontificating about that needs to happen. I almost shed a tear for Melissa. I said, what in the world? What's your nice, innocent looking self? I mean, But the reality is somebody's got to have courage. In Richmond metropolitan area, I'm saying to us, from what I've heard here, our time is now to have some courage. I say thank you to the Avulas. I say thank you to the Illians. I say thank you to the many other families. I say thank you to the families, because this is the other thing I want you to see about me standing here. Foster home, projects, standing up here, talking to you educrats. What am I doing talking? Because at the end of the day, this stuff has to get to the people. It has to get to the people. And I say to the families who are moving back to the city, please count the cost. It costs something. It takes courage to say, no, I'm not going to give up. And no, despite how hard it is, I realize that this has to happen. And when the school board or the principal or somebody doesn't treat me the way I feel like I need to be treated, I'm still going to stay in. I'm still going to press through. Because for this Richmond metropolitan area, I think we have an opportunity. I really do. I really do. I really do believe that. I thank the people who put this together, Genevieve, all you, thank you all so much. But, you know, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about what's going to happen. When I went on my break today and I was talking to somebody what was happening here, one lady told me, and she works down in the city doing great work. She said, Don, my question is, though, so what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I saw this gentleman. But at the end of the day, we're going to need people of influence to influence people that this needs to happen. But we're also going to need to find people to support and encourage families like the Avulas, families like the Illians, who choose to go into the city and make a difference. The human factor. Thank you for being here. But I really want you to do something a little deeper for me. Examine your heart. And decide in your heart that this is valuable enough to talk about it everywhere you go. It's valuable enough when some of because this is what some of our young people have to deal with who decide to move to the city, when their parents are saying, what are you doing? Those of us who are their parents' age, would you choose to say to them, well, that is awesome what your kids are doing, but those are my grandkids. Let me say this to you. Another thing I just saw this week. We did not get to this point without people, and I'm talking specifically this metropolitan area, who were intentional about making decisions to put us in this situation. And then we had people like Dr. King and come along and all that. But let me say something to you, and this is going to sound bad, but I need you to hear it. How many of you believe Dr. King was a great man? Okay, thank you very much. How many of you believe he did great things? Dr. King is dead. Well, what are you saying, school board preacher? What I'm saying is, you may not have to physically die, but you may have to give up something. And I say this for the people who are going to watch this on the tape. what I want to say to you, you couldn't be here today, and I want to say this to you boldly. Maybe when you enter into this kind of work, part of what families may have to realize is this: what may be best for my child may not be best for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have just heard from three incredibly courageous leaders. Let's give them another round of applause. I'd actually written some questions to ask, but you guys have got me all turned around now. Because so much of what you have said resonates to me personally, and I know that with each courageous decision comes another scar. And while the public may not see them on the outside, those who are close to you see them. And these three leaders are carrying a lot of scars because they have done a lot of good. And it's people like them and those who have come before them have allowed us to be in this room today. And you probably represent the 1% in the world who are privileged to be at the level of education status that you are, and economic status. So we have so much to be thankful for. And I don't want us to lose track of how far we have come.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
You know, when this whole thing started 40 years ago, my parents could never have dreamt that I would be able to serve as a leader of schools that I could not have even attended.
That's right.
And as a grandparent of a kindergartner who is the class of 2025, I hope that he can stand before a group to say, my granddad could never have dreamt that I would be where I am today and this nation will be where it is today.
That's good. That's good.
Now, Mr. Preacher.
Come on, sir.
Just calling you out.
We know that there's a scripture that says faith without works is dead. And so I'm going to take your challenge that we all need to do something when we leave this room. And I want to commend Tom and Genevieve and Kim and John for getting together over a cup of coffee. And not only talking but having faith, but doing the work that has brought us together to this point. So let's give them a round of applause.
Yes.
And I just wanted to recognize one more group, the students and especially the young lady who's been holding up the cards for me. Our students, let's give them a round of applause, too. I'm surprised you haven't held up a red card for me yet, but last year, I presented a $500 million budget to our school board to take action on. And we had one citizen to come to the board meeting to speak on a $500 million budget. But if I tried to move 3 kids from one school to another, you can't get a seat in the boardroom. So my question to this panel is, how do you protect the children when the adults behave like the ones that we've seen on the screen? Because as it's been said, children adapt. And so what do you do, what did you do, or what do you do before, during, or after the process to help students? And either one of you can start with the response.
I'll start. Yeah, absolutely. We thought a lot about our kids in this process, and we watched a lot of uncivil behavior among adults, and we knew that there were kids that were watching this at home and in some cases in the boardroom. But what we could control had to do with the adults within the system. So, you know, a lot of conversation with school leaders and with teaching staff, really with any employee, that while we are going through this time and while you're watching all of this lack of civility in our community right now, please, please, please never take your eye off the prize, which is never take your eye off our students. And let us manage this, but please go to work every day and just do your best work with our students. You don't need to have conversations about this in the classroom. Keep teaching, keep doing your best work. So it was a lot of meetings that I held with school leaders and that school leaders held with their staff to keep them informed so that they could keep teaching. So it was an intentional effort and it was systemic in nature. And I have to say, I think our employees did a lot of that, but I don't think it was by accident. It was intentional, and we mapped it out and we planned it out and we drafted things and we handed them notes and we gave them information and we armed them and we equipped them with information so they could keep teaching and keep leading while others of us were managing, you know, things that were unpleasant and things that we didn't want kids to have to worry about or get involved with. So that was sort of our strategy.
In Wake County, because of the growth that we had, there was not a single year until the last one that there was not a reassignment of students starting in 1975. There was one year, 1977, when the reassignment was made and the parents refused to move their kids. And I won't say that it became routine because it's never routine, but in the district, the employees understood that because of the growth, we had to do some things. And to build their capacity to stay focused on the mission and to have a clear vision was important. We had to have conversations. I would often joke with employees and other folks and tell them that the greatest damage is done to the Wake County Public School System at the produce counter at the food line. When a parent asks an employee, so how's it going? And he says, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe it, this reassignment thing or whatever it might be. And so, of course, we never said to folks, don't talk about things, don't share your feelings, but remember what our mission is, what our vision is, to stay focused on that. And it didn't always happen as it should because employees have visions and they have values and they have opinions. And so we did spend as much time as we could educating them. We made awfully sure that as decisions were made, they had as much data, as much information as possible and understood the rationale behind it. Could I say that there were times that reassignment didn't impact learning? There were times when reassignment impacted learning, and that was unfortunate. When you're moving 3,000 kids, 6,000 kids, and one time 20,000 kids, you can imagine that there's going to be an impact. But having the employees know what the purpose is, and that understanding that the purpose is to make every school in the Wake County Public School System a good place for kids, drove us, and that carried us a long way.
Now, in our situation, you know, one of the things is, you know, again, you have families who are moving in, who are then starting to attend the local schools there. And a lot of times there ends up being tension between, again, their kids are the new minorities, you know, in the school. And one of the things, and Kim helped me with this term, is massive persistence. Is that correct? That's what we feel like the parents have to be persistent in civil, proper ways, engaging with the principal and the school in the right way, to look out for their child.
Thank you. This is the portion of the program where you get involved in the conversation, and so we'll take questions from the audience. And yes, sir, gentleman in the back.
Pastor Coleman.
Could you hold the mic a little bit closer to your mouth? It's on. Just hold it close.
Pastor Coleman, I live in your district. I voted for you, and I expect I'll vote for you again. And I stand with you with the things you said. But if I can quote, I think I got a quote from Mr. Burns, who talked about today's solutions become tomorrow's problems. I think that's one of the things you said. And to some extent, I've lived in the Churchill area for about 30 years. I've seen a lot of young families move in, buy a property, raise children. When they get to school age, you know what they do? They move out to the counties. But usually those same households are replaced by other people who are in effect gentrifying the area. And I have to say to some extent I've been part of that solution of gentrifying the area. And what I see happening in the broader East End is more of the old families who grew up there moving out. And maybe like the discussion of the cartoon this morning, the inner city finally becomes all white again, and they've solved the problem. So my question really is, how can we have this development of the educational system that's integrated without, and still maintain a diverse community that is integrated?
Okay. Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I think the key word there is intentionality. And these families that I was just telling you about, that's what they're doing. They're intentionally also engaging the indigenous people of the community that have already been there. This whole thing that's happening at Chimborazo is that reality, is that what's going to happen for that school is going to be for all the students who live in the zone. It's not a school you can apply to. You're there, you live in the zone, that's your school. And that was very important for us when we decided to go about the route we're going about, because the other thing is education. You know, what I appreciate about the parishioners at my church is that we talk about gentrification. We talk about, like the church I'm co-pastor of, we're 60% white in the inner city of Churchill. Okay, so we know that, hey, we better be intentional about making sure that we're not creating some little enclave. And so the way you do that is you work at it. You be intentional about it. And you hold us accountable. Would you do that? Ben Campbell does.
We have a question over here.
Yes, can you speak more to, and this is for Donald Coleman, more to what some of the challenges may be with respect to having what we could characterize as a clash of cultures in these centers, in Chimborazo in particular, people with different sets of beliefs and values and that kind of thing coming together around the question of education, and how might we meet the challenge?
I think it's what we've been hearing over this past day and a half. Clear communication and conversations. One of the things that our local church is doing for the past 9 months, well, be 9 months, we're dealing with race. We're having a special meeting where we're talking about the reality of how race is having an impact on our local church and in our community, and having hard conversations. As a matter of fact, this past Sunday, I dared people to come out this Sunday, because we know it's going to press into something harder. And I think for our region, it's not rocket science. This is going to be hard, but we got to have those hard conversations. And that's why we appreciate the 4 people who got together and got us here today. And as Dr. Newsome said, faith without works, we got to work at it. And I would challenge us to be in those hard conversations.
Thank you. Barbara Winston, former educator with Chesterfield County Schools. I'm currently a
Could you hold the mic up a little closer and repeat that?
Barbara Winston, former teacher in Chesterfield County Schools.
I want to make sure we got that.
I am now a University Supervisor with VCU. I want to switch the topic a bit to look at teacher diversity. Most of our suburban schools, the percentage of minority educators and staff, administrators, below 10%. I would like for you to address how are we going to deal with this, because we need to look at the parallels that exist between diversity in the classroom with the teachers and administrators as well as the students. Is your district dealing with this situation, or is it just something that we have pushed under the table? Thank you.
Well, I'll just tell you, my initial response to your question is it's extremely important to diversify the workforce. And it was extremely important to me in my district, and it continues to be extremely important to me. When we look at kids in our classrooms, when children in our classrooms who need support and guidance can look at faces of teachers and administrators and leaders that look like them, progress is made, period. I just think it's extremely important, and I think we have to be intentional and recruit and actively find the folks that we need in our schools, and we don't wait for people to show up at our doorstep. We go after them. We find them, and we look for the systemic, basically, there's a lot of systemic racism in these hiring practices, right? And I know I'm not saying anything that people in this room don't already know, but it requires the leadership to unearth those practices that are not helpful and that screen people out that should not be screened out, and you have to unearth those systems, reroute them, redesign them, and open up your options to create pathways for people to teach and lead in your schools that look like the kids that we're teaching. So I just think it should be at the top of our list of priorities.
In Wake County, if I could speak to that, it has long been difficult to address the issue of diversity among the faculty. The hiring was at a high level. There were many years we hired between 1,200 and 1,500 teachers per year, given growth and turnover. One of the difficulties resides in the candidate pool. And one of the issues that we began to think about, and I don't know where it is at the moment, I hope it's continuing, is to ask the question of students in high school. Who's interested in being a teacher? Well, there are many options now for very bright kids, white, non-white, and trying to encourage kids to look at public education as an option is important to increase that candidate pool. So that looking back up the stream as much as possible is an important part of it. And it can go as far as in high school when counselors talk with kids and advise them when they're thinking about colleges, college majors. That's an important part in universities and colleges as well. What happens there? I certainly have no right to speak to that. Once kids are graduated, the practices in districts need to be always reviewed and at the forefront. And it is a system. It's not just an individual component to be addressed. So I think it's a great opportunity, but it really can be impacted by us in public schools, not necessarily impacting the candidate pool on the back end, but on the front end. What do we do to help kids consider public school teaching?
And I would say in RPS, if I can just be very candid, I mean, come on, white people. We got a lot of white teachers. Yeah. You know, it's just, they're there. The teachers are there. And again, as Dr. Newsome was talking about, I realize we've come a long way. There are a lot of young teachers who are choosing to come and work in the urban school.
Thank you. Yes.
My question is the interaction before school. We're talking about the school, but if you don't connect with people in your neighborhood and in social environment, then the school represents that same dichotomy. I mean, we can go into restaurants. My husband and I go into a restaurant, we look around, we're the only people of color in this particular restaurant. It's like, what's up with that? So if you don't have a conversation before you get to school, when you get to school, you self-segregate, not because, well, it's like, okay, I walk in the room quite often presenting, and I look around, I'm like, okay, who else is here that looks like me? And I'm not uncomfortable with that, I've gotten accustomed to it, but at the same time, I'm saying, okay, where's this diversity that we celebrate? It's not here. Sunday morning, where is it? So how do we get the, because our kids are okay. You know, my kids, I mean, she can interact with anybody, but we adults are still kind of separate but equal. That's just my question. How do we begin that dialogue? I mean, I carry that conversation when I'm at my job, and I ask the question because I do diversity training. I'm with the Department of Education. And I'll do cultural competence, and I ask the question. Because when we look around, even when you look, our culture's not the same just because we look alike. So we got to have cultures more than race. It's just urban versus suburban. Southampton County versus Richmond City versus Roanoke. I mean, so we got to go there. So how do we then make those connections outside of school so when we get to school, we're comfortable? Because it's about comfort as well.
I think most of the people in this room want to try to answer your question, but I'm going to yield to the three panelists.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents. I agree with you. You know, I think about that when I look at the community I just left, predominantly, largely a white community, growing more diverse over time. As we attempted to make the decisions we made to integrate and balance the schools, we lost many white families who flew away, as they do, and created. Impacted the balance at the end of the day. But the experiences that our kids have before they come to school, when they're in school, and after school matters. So my daughter happens to be in a program called After School Matters. And that's actually the name of it. And I just moved her from the district I was in. My daughter is Latina. And she left a classroom of 3 students of color and entered into a school that is 60% students of color. And now her classroom is very richly diverse. And she spends time in school and after school with friends that look like her. And I thought she was happy when she was in school with me when I was the superintendent. I thought she was doing great. I had no idea how much happier she could be. I knew she could be happy, and I knew she was, but when she became so much more confident, it surprised me because I thought she was already there, and she wasn't. And she is so it completely works. I'm just such a believer that it matters and it works, and after school matters in her life. And so this system she's in now has created a mechanism for this to happen for kids. So they stay together and have after school experiences 4 out of 5 days a week, which kind of, I don't think it answers it completely, but it gets at what you're asking.
Thank you, Melissa. We are starting to run short on time, but I would like to ask Minister Coleman here to address a part of this issue because the faith community is a very important part of schools and the community, and it is one of the most segregated areas of our society, yet you are involved in a ministry that has been able to overcome that. Can you speak to that a little bit and give us maybe some advice about how we can improve?
Well, I think, again, a part of it is what she was saying. There has to be a level of intentionality. And for our local church, and if you want to read our story, I've got some copies. We were featured in a magazine, Christianity Today, so I got some copies if you like. It's people making intentional decisions. And that's how our church is racially diverse, because people chose to move into the city and be a part of the healing of the city. And now, she just brought it up, social networks, that's what we actually going to be dealing with this Sunday, is that, like you say, people move in, but then they find themselves kind of finding their little crew together. And so we have to still even be more intentional about making sure, even though we go to church together, are we actually spending time socially together? And that's what we want to press into. And it's being intentional, and it irritates one another, because I don't know about you, I like to be with who I like to be with. It's really that simple. But when we talk about where we need change, it's going to cost us something. So thank you so much for sharing.
I think we have time for one more question. The students with the microphones have been determining who gets to ask that question. I've seen on this side of the room, I'm sorry. You have the mic over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a diversity and inclusion practitioner, and I thought the question regarding working together and spending time together is a very important one, because But what we have to realize is that much of the bias that we have, you know, whites, people of color, what have you, they're ours. They belong to an older generation. When you look at the newer generations in the workforce, millennials, they don't necessarily bring those same biases. They have their own. They have different types of biases, but much of the mistrust that we have based on things that have happened, you know, during the civil rights era and earlier, really just doesn't exist anymore. So when we are seeing these things manifest, we have to recognize that, you know, we are the ones that are manifesting it. So even now, with the level of segregation we're seeing in education, you're still seeing children who have less racial bias than many of us who were bused and did attend much more diverse schools than they see now. As a Hermitage Panther Pride, I heard earlier. But the reality is, you know, we need to consider that this next generation has just an incredible skill set, incredible tools. If we do not burden them with many of the experiences and fears and biases and mistrust that we have, then we're going to see some of these changes happen, I believe, organically over time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. That's a wonderful way to end this session. We are at our time limit. I want to thank you for being a great audience. But I think that as compensation for the great job that they did today, we should all stand to our feet and show our appreciation for this panel.
Yeah, let's get off the stage. Very good. Very good. Good exit.
So we could also give another round of applause, though, for our great moderator, Dr. Newsome, just incredible. We'd like to now continue just to roll right into the final with this kind of nice conclusion here for our panels. Continue to roll into the final session here where we'll have a give and take with you all, and then knowing that at the end is a nice reception with some good beverages out in the hallway. So if we can keep you just for one more moment. I'd also like to have Gina Giacchino come up if she can. And a lot of the work we've done you can find on One Nation Indivisible in their website that I think Gina will talk to you about, and also the National Coalition on School Diversity. And Gina's just going to talk to you a little bit. I know some of you got some of the materials that were on the right side as you came in here, a little table, but Gina's been so helpful to all of us working on this conference, so I just want to hand the mic over to Gina, and then I'll have Kim Bridges to come up to conduct the final session.
So I'm going to be very brief. Many of you already have the literature that we had out on the table. We actually have stories about Melissa's district and John McKeel's district. If you want to learn more about those stories, they're available outside or on our website. But basically, I just want to say sort of who I'm representing and offer ourselves as resources to you as you go through this process. So I wear sort of two hats. One is I co-direct with Susan Eaton the One Nation Indivisible project, which is a documentation and strategic organizing project. Many of the superintendents and leaders that you have heard from today are people we've connected with through the last year and a half, really, of our project. And the idea is really to understand more about the real people and places that are going through these changes and to help support the work that they're doing. So these are people who are trying to create, sustain, or substantially improve integration in schools, housing, and social and political institutions. So we write narratives about those places, and then we also really try to connect the people who are doing this work so that there's a community of practice. What we're finding is a lot of people who are doing this work are burning out, are feeling incredibly isolated and unsupported, and that a lot of the policies that are in place really undermine the work that they're trying to do. So our project really exists to make sure that their stories are part of the larger discourse on education. So please sign up for our newsletter. We don't send a whole ton of emails out, so we won't bombard you. And please feel free to use our materials. And connect with us if you're interested in having conversations or if you're planning conferences about people to place on panels. The other group that I'm representing is the National Coalition on School Diversity, and I was hoping anyone who's part of our coalition, if you can stand up. Again, many of the people you heard from today are part of the coalition. We are a group of about 25 different civil rights organizations and university-based research centers that do mostly federal policy advocacy on school integration. So we are a resource to you. We work with a group of about 15 different researchers who are known for their research on equity and desegregation. Genevieve is one, Jim Ryan, Bill Trent, you heard from him. We produce research briefs as well as issue briefs that really try to help people understand the places where there are opportunities to integrate or to help support integration. And also the idea is that we want policy informing practice, informing research. So we really try to connect groups of researchers and people who are doing that work with the advocacy side of things, with the policy side of things, and then hopefully informing practice as well. So there are tons of resources available through the coalition, and as you go through this process, we really hope that you will find our resources helpful and that you will understand that there's a community for you as you go through this work. So thank you for being here, and good luck with everything.
So next I'd like to invite Kim Bridges up so we can go into the conclusion here. And if you are thinking of leaving and leaving early, if you can, just remember to fill out one of those questionnaires, okay? And if you have friends that have left, make sure that we're trying to collect those, okay?
So my husband just texted, he's a police officer, he got caught up in work and he texted and says, is there any reason for me still to come? And I said, free beer and wine. And that's what I'm dangling for y'all. I think the only reason I got asked by the group of the four of us to come up at the end is they know I'm this type A person with constant spreadsheets. And so I had one today, and I tried to put a bullet point from every speaker and every session. Tom has just discouraged me from reading each of those bullet points to you, so you can thank him. But what I will tell you from the notes are a couple of quick impressions, and then we did want Gary and Bill Trent to come back up. We have very precious few moments still with them, and they are here to say as much as they can and also hear what you all have to say. The group that convened this conference came up with 4 informal goals that I don't know that we actually ever wrote anywhere, but we talked about them. Goal number 1, help everyone understand why things are the way they are. So that's where we started, right? Goal number 2, recognize the benefits of pursuing diversity across the region. I hope we all saw some of those today. Goal number 3, explore potential solutions and talk about challenges. And goal number 4, we kept adding to. Start a conversation, start a network, start action. And then finally, I just wrote down what's going to happen. And I think that's where we all are right now. I hope you agree with us that we went through at least those first 3 goals, but we did not want to impose a solution today. That is not our place. And certainly not everyone, as someone said, who needs to be at the table is at the table yet, and we recognize that. So those were our goals starting out. The one word that popped up several times in all of my bullets from each session, believe it or not, surprised me, and it's intentional. John and Paul started this morning talking about why we are here is because of intentional actions 40 plus years ago. Jim Ryan talked about the whole Supreme Court decision was over the narrowing of the word intent and how he thinks we need to go back to the original broader ethical logical definition of intent. And you certainly heard intentionality repeatedly by this final conversation. I mean, that's Don Coleman's whole mantra. It's intentional and it's hard work. So that was my common thread. I'm seeing some nodding. I hope we all came up with some of the same things. And I'd like to invite Gary and Bill Trent to come back up with us and take us through. Can y'all quickly answer what's going to happen next? Because it's a big question mark on my sheet.
Gary's got it.
It's great to be here with Bill, who's an old colleague I got to know years ago and have been with him in many places, always learning from him. I didn't until I heard Reverend Coleman talking, I hadn't really recalled how lonely I've been for some really good preaching, which you can only hear south of the Mason-Dixon line. It's really good to hear that. Bill, I don't know how we should do this, but I thought I might start by just setting a little historical reflection. We have been going backwards on school segregation now for almost a quarter century, since the Supreme Court changed the rules. After the Reconstruction, we went backwards as a country, and we got stuck in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, for 60 years before the Brown decision, and another 10 years before it began to be implemented. We don't want to go that way. One of my graduate teachers was a great historian, John Hope Franklin, maybe the greatest black historian of the 20th century. And he often talked about this. He talked about how when we started going backwards, when the great civil rights amendments of the Constitution after the Civil War were interpreted away into nothingness, and in fact used to defend corporate rights and to eliminate the rights of minorities, nobody said anything in most of the country. It was just accepted. The exception of some scholars in the African American colleges who wrote about it. We just sank into that. I think that one of the encouraging things about these meetings here and other discussions around the country is there are a lot of people who know there's a better way, and they're not about to give up, and they are willing to pay some price, and they do need to get organized and see each other and not feel alone. One of my students, when I was a young professor at Princeton, a Woodrow Wilson school, was a young man from Atlanta named Taylor Branch, who became the Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer of Martin Luther King, in this magisterial 3-volume life of Dr. King. And I asked him one day when he was visiting our project, when does a movement start? The first volume of that book, a lot of it is about the movements that started in small communities in the South that ultimately became the Civil Rights Revolution. And they started with churches and individuals. And I said, when does a movement start, Taylor? And he said to me, when one person says, I will not accept this, this is unjust, and other people begin to join him. And they really began to address deep values that are deeply shared and have the courage to move. And, you know, it doesn't take very many people to do that. It takes a few people to begin to articulate something that many people feel somewhere in their hearts and begin to move on. And I think that that's one of the important things that's happening here more than concrete details. So I'll come back after a minute, but Bill's a good preacher too.
Thank you, Gary. It was 1957, and I was watching TV when Governor Coleman said, here in Richmond, over my dead body will they desegregate the schools in the state of Virginia. It's interesting growing up, having that as a memory of home, but what it reminds me of is the importance of the intentionality. A lot of people sacrificed a great deal to get us to where we are today, to have an opportunity to actually pursue the kind of learning context that we're describing, that we're talking about. But it isn't easy work, and I think we forget sometimes that for a governor to make a statement like that, it shows just how deeply entrenched, and this is not just about Virginia, this is about the country. It's important for us to appreciate how deeply embedded this sense of maintaining segregation has been, and in many minds still is. We have to be as intentional if we're going to build the kind of spaces for our children that we think they deserve, that they merit, that they are worthy of. We have to work on developing the understandings and insights to be able to produce teachers who do have the kind of cultural competence that allows them to teach across lots of different boundaries. We can do that. We know how to do that. There are lots of black academics who were trained to be outstanding scholars, not by other black scholars, but by other white scholars. We know how to do that. We know how to teach across a variety of boundaries. We need to be able to capture that set of understandings and do that. I can't get beyond the idea that one of the most important resources that any child has really is that teacher. The good blessing that I had to be able to be here today is to have had teachers that I can still name. I can remember the specific things that they did. I can remember being in love with Mrs. Shouldn't call her last name. When I was 2 years, when I was in the second grade. I can remember those teachers because they loved what they did. They loved watching us grow, and they were committed to our development and growth. Now, we've lost a lot of those kinds of teachers. But it's those kinds of teachers who are willing to be dedicated to our children that we need to be in the business of developing. Our institution tries to do it. We too are faced with challenges in getting young people to come into the profession. We have a lot of work to do to improve the quality of the profession, the quality of the spaces in which these educators work. But we can do that. We can make a commitment to really push that. We got here because someone refused to tolerate it anymore. We have to develop that kind of willingness not to tolerate, commitment not to tolerate, not to be patient about, and be willing to make the investments of time and energy and effort to do it. That's not easy work. That's why we need to support LDEF, MALDEF, all of those agencies, those companies that oftentimes do pro bono work on the legal side in order to push these issues. They are not funded well, not nearly as well as the opposition is usually funded. If we're going to make these kinds of changes work, we're going to have to make those sorts of sacrifices and investments.
I just want to take a minute of your time to just kind of reflect on what we learned today and what we ought to do about it. Because we don't believe in harmless research in our project. We believe in trying to change the world and realize the best values of our civilization and our legal system and our educational system. We sunk into decline in some important ways, and in a period of selfishness and narrowness and in a period of fear. But we do have a whole generation of people who learned about opportunities, who experienced successful interracial contact, and who've been transformed by it, and who remember it and don't want to lose it. And we don't have to lose it. We learned that, not too much has happened here without somebody forcing it. It's time for us to do it on our own and to begin to create some change and to change the discussion, which is the first stage. We've seen a lot of evidence that segregation matters, that it's a cost, that diversity is positive, and it is a gain. It's not a zero-sum game. When you integrate schools, especially if you do it well, you don't have one side lose and the other side gains. Everybody gains. Everybody gains in terms of not only what they learn and what they understand, that's not just in the curriculum, but also understanding of their society, but they gain in preparation for the kind of society we're going to be in. It's a positive-sum game. The segregation is a negative-sum game. Everybody loses in important ways, and the whole community loses. One of the things I wanted to say in ending is, people talk about how hard this is, but they don't talk about how good it is and how fun it is in some ways. When my first daughter went to school in Washington, D.C., we lived in a neighborhood that was gentrifying on Capitol Hill, but the school that was 99% black and 99% poor, and where the average child was a full year behind at the end of second grade. My daughter went to that kindergarten. I was elected vice president of PTA in my first PTA meeting. Somebody said, I nominate that man in the second row. I think I was the only man who was there, actually. But we organized that neighborhood and talked to people. Why send your children to private schools? Why move to the suburbs, which are boring, when you can live in the middle, walking distance from the United States Capitol and the Supreme Court? People came together. They came into that school. It changed the dynamics of the neighborhood. People worked together across racial lines, and they shared all the most important deep values, and they learned about each other's culture. That neighborhood was transformed by it. The school was empowered. People began to move into the neighborhood because it was exciting. Now, many years later, my granddaughter entered that school this year. It's still an interracial school. And my daughter who started there, one of my daughters who started kindergarten there, is now a parent and a pretty high-ranking attorney in the United States Department of Justice. You know, it didn't hurt her, it enriched her. It was a powerful experience. And we had a lot of fun doing it, because every time the bureaucracy did something stupid, we beat them. Every time we had a problem, we wrote a grant or we figured out how to do something. You know, there's tremendous energy in those neighborhoods, and it's not used, and it's not tied into the public schools. It doesn't become a support for the public schools. But when you do it, it's not just all hard work. It's not all hard. It's not a big sacrifice in the end. It's something that is really fascinating and empowering, and it changes your life and it changes your neighborhood. You know, people can do that if they decide to do it. It's not rocket science. You just have to get a critical mass of people together so they don't feel isolated, and show that their kids are going to be treated fairly and they can get ready to go to a good college. The kids are not afraid of this. You know, it's not that hard to do. I think if we think about it, we learned we could do things about housing, we could do things about you know, college access, that tie that into enriching our neighborhoods, keeping people in there, making them more successful. We could do things about, you know, community services. We could do things in many ways that would make these things work out differently. There is an implicit plan that's built into our society and into our fears and into our history to just accept segregation and let it expand. It fails. We have another option, and we can all do something about it, some piece of it, and if we get together, we can do a tremendous amount about it. And it's time to pull up our socks and get busy.
I have so much to say, I can hardly stand it, honestly. It's been a wonderful, wonderful shot in the arm to be here today and to be in the room with all these. I mean, it's really been a privilege to be in the room with so many people committed to integration. And, you know, I've lots of comments about, well, I guess I'll just share one, which is the idea, you know, my pedigree about advocacy is not as long as many people in the room, but one thing that I have learned in the time that I've been an advocate is when it gets ugly on the other side, they can be doing you a tremendous favor by showing folks the logical extreme of their position, of their unconscious privileged position. And so I try to take heart when that happens, when it gets ugly. I try to take heart that that is doing us good in some fashion and moving us forward when we engage in the work. So I wanted to say that, and I wanted to say what's next is I hope that we don't lose this opportunity, because we have all these wonderful people in this room, and this group could be a wonderful mechanism for advocacy in Richmond. So I hope we take that opportunity.
My name is Margie Berry. I'm a transplant from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've only been here for 5 years, and I'm just now starting to venture out and learn about my new state. And you have definitely educated me about this state in terms of education. But one of the things I found very disturbing is one of the speakers mentioned how teachers many times would leave a school rather than teach individuals that they don't like the way that they look. In the corporate world, there are assessments made to determine whether or not you can deal with those individuals that you have to deal with, specifically in the law enforcement field. Would it be totally out of the question that those individuals who are being prepared to go into schools be assessed sociologically, psychologically to determine if they indeed need to be in the classroom and teaching all types of individuals?
Bill will start. I'll see if I have anything to add.
This is probably going back about 20 years to the National Panel on School Desegregation, but I had an opportunity to interview actually a woman who was previous superintendent here, Lois Harrison Jones, who's worked here in Richmond. And what we actually talked about was whether or not we could identify the people who had the proper dispositions. And it's difficult work. I have in court cases used measurements of teacher efficacy, where teachers were surveyed regarding their relative sense of their ability to make a difference. The science of identifying those attributes, those skills, those competencies is still developing. I don't think it's where it necessarily needs to be to make hard and fast decisions about who can and who should. But I think we can get strong indications of people who have certain kinds of proclivities and some indication of their sense of efficacy about the kinds of context in which they could be effective. So we do have, I agree that we do need to continue to do that. It made a difference in the Kansas City case with respect to how that ruling initially went down.
Just to add briefly, you know, most of our teachers are white suburban young women, and they don't have the relevant experience to work across racial and class lines, and they usually aren't given much training and much realistic help. But they are sincere, and they want to be good teachers, and they really don't know. And then they are faced with an assessment system, and No Child Left Behind, and state assessments and so forth, that punish them if they stay in high-poverty schools. And we have to think about all the pieces of this. We have to think about getting more students of color to go into teacher training institutions, have the teacher training institutions be more supportive of them, and we have to think about much better training and in free service training in diverse schools with people who have positive ideas about how to do it. And we have to not assess them in an irrational way after they go to the schools, and in a way that just rewards them for leaving the schools, but rewards them for staying and making a difference. It's a big job, and it really is tied into a really sick policy framework that uses assessments in an incorrect and destructive way rather than in a constructive and positive way. And that is a really big, not only just for race relations, but for teaching and learning in general, a very big set of issues that people do need to address. Our policies are made by people who are enacting sound bites, trying to sound tough. They're not made by people who understand how educational change actually takes place. So those of us who know something about it have a responsibility to participate in that discussion very broadly.
In the back of the room.
I'm Chris Walter Thomas. I'm the dean. Is it working? Oh, good. I'm the Dean of the School of Education at VCU. And I've only been here since July, but I have been a Virginian since 1990. I was on the faculty at William & Mary for 13 years. And one of the things that has impressed me greatly over the last 8 or 9 months of being here is to see the kinds of partnerships that are taking place in schools. And I would agree with Gary, many of the things that you've said about teachers are some of the things that we face as challenges every day as we try to prepare the best teachers we can. It's a tough profession for people to go into. Why don't we get more people who are sensitive to the issues of segregation, because they are going on to other fields. If you are a good student and you are going into college, you will get very little encouragement to become a teacher. Every day when we open the paper, we see how many teachers are being criticized for their efforts. Every year, teachers live in fear about the assessment scores and will they be published on the front page of the paper. We are working hard with our partners, and I think Richmond, University of Richmond and VCU are, we have a number of collaborative programs in place where we're trying to ensure that the professionals we prepare really are ready for these schools. Part of the finding out if you have the right disposition is part of the teacher preparation process from the beginning of who we recruit through all of the courses they take. Part of our requirements in being an accredited school is to make sure they do teach in and work in diverse communities. So I'd like to give you one example of a partnership that we have taking place right now, and then 2 quick recommendations for what we can do to improve the quality of those teachers. We currently have a federally funded project called the Richmond Teacher Residency Program, and we provide stipends for some of the best and brightest students that we recruit from all over the country. We're looking especially for math and science teachers, and we place them in the Richmond City Schools for a year, and they work as a co-teacher under the direction of a capable master teacher. And after they successfully finish their programs, then they are required through the federal program and the agreement they set that they will stay on as employees in the school. Because what we know is if a teacher will stay in a school for about 3 years, then the chances of that teacher staying on are much greater. So the mentoring, the support, the knowing the community. Some of our business partners here in town have worked together to ensure these teachers are able to live together. They have apartments in Shockoe Bottom and a work area so that many of their seminar classes can be taught there. Expanding those kinds of policies and programs is important. Our biggest challenge is having people come and do this for $25,000 a year. So to the extent that you can help, 2 things. Speak up when the opportunity is there to support increased funding for teachers. We need the community to talk to your legislators to be able to ensure that teachers can earn a living wage. And second is teachers need all the help they can get. So how do we get citizens into those schools? And I'm happy to be sitting next to Harold Fithra, who is the Executive Director of Communities and Schools, where we get wonderful cooperation from the community to really do the kinds of extra duty help that teachers need. So to the extent that you're able to reach out to your constituent groups, your network groups, whether it's churches, businesses, neighborhoods, and how do you help with your own local neighborhood school? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fred Millar. You know, I'd like to mention just a few things from the grassroots, and maybe I should kind of turn around on this one. In Arlington, we have a few people who are starting to challenge Arlington's segregated schools. But those three words, Arlington segregated schools, are three words that no elected official in Arlington is allowed to say in public. We are beginning to say it as citizens and as a few parents, but it is off the table for discussion. For 20 years, it has not been on the table for discussion, so we could use some help. Sometimes I ask people from Richmond and other parts of the state if they could do a little missionary work in Northern Virginia. But let me mention on the SRO question, on the question about police in our schools and who's in our schools, are they well trained, et cetera. You may know there's a big controversy about how after the gun violence incidents we want more guns in our schools, and various people in the state government have asked for more money for SROs, what the Supreme Court calls so-called school resource officers, meaning people with guns walking around in our schools. And so there's been some research on that shows that there's a lot of problems with the fact that most of these SRO programs in the nation, it seems, don't even have a good program. They don't, I mean, it's not really well organized at all. They don't have data, they don't have this. They're nice people walking around in our schools. And in Arlington, I can say that there's no program worth a darn in terms of the SROs we have. We only have 6, Fairfax has 53, and the state reports that come out say that in Virginia as a whole, the average SRO there's a turnover rate of 43% every 2 years. I mean, this is not a highly valued profession that a lot of police officers are really eager to get into. I mean, it's just not. So, in any case, see, there are other categories of people that have emerged in our grassroots work, namely other nice people walking around in schools include minority student coordinators, minority achievement coordinators that we have, and that's a similar problem with not really a serious program at all. They're people of color walking around in schools, and I'm not saying that's not valuable in terms of students being able to find somebody they can identify with. The same thing applies in some ways to bilingual people, resource assistants we call them. There's no programs for these people a lot of times. So that has, I mean, their effectiveness and their efficacy and their training and their suitability has to be worked on much, much harder. Other things that we are challenging are, right now Arlington is doing boundary changes. So they are reinforcing their segregative boundaries. I'm just going to mention some of the parts of the work. They're reinforcing boundary changes that are based on segregative principles that have resulted in segregated schools and will continue to do so. So we need to figure out how to challenge that, right? We're also looking at various of the institutions within the schools that basically underlie minority achievement gaps and that have never been examined with program evaluations. That includes elementary school grouping. It's just a black box. It's never, nobody collects data on it. Nobody knows what's happening except maybe you and your teacher. But it's obviously a key institution. It's really kept quite secret. The other, I mean, Arlington, they say we do flexible grouping, right? They don't have any data to show that. Okay, the second thing is course selection. Course selection has never been evaluated in Arlington, Virginia. This is a very rich school district. We spend $19,500 per year per student, and our evaluation budget is $120,000 a year. Pitiful. I mean, they've never evaluated course selection, and I'm very concerned as a sociologist about talking about cultural competence, because I know that although it probably works for some people and is a very enriching experience, to show that it then translates into practice is a very dubious proposition, and I think we need to work on that. The other piece of work that comes up is we're thinking about filing some OCR complaints in Arlington. We're thinking about filing either with the DOJ or with the Department of Education some federal complaints, because we've had some evidence about things happening in our system that are just illegal. I mean, our English language learning system, for example, you can just argue it's illegal. It's so bad as to be illegal. I mean, there's a federal law that says you have to provide adequate English language learning, and we don't. And so I've been asking people advice about that. The networking at this conference has been so wonderful in terms of learning about various resources available. And the final thing to say is we're starting to do some media work. I mean, it turns out that raising questions about segregation in Virginia is sort of media interesting. I mean, it's sort of newsworthy. I mean, you can create some interest. And so we've had articles in the Washington Post, op-ed pieces, and articles about boundary changes and so forth. And we've had, NPR has covered some of our stuff. I mean, just a few people, I just want to be encouraging, just a few people raising concerns about segregated schools in Virginia can be newsworthy because it's been off the table for so long. So anyway, thanks so much for all the work that everybody's doing out there. And I'm trying to be encouraging, even though there's a big mountain that we have to climb for over a long period of time. Thanks.
One of the things that people should remember is that there is still a Civil Rights Act, and there still is an Office for Civil Rights in a United States Department of Justice. And if people are intentionally gerrymandering school district lines or doing other things that are obviously designed to produce segregation, it's still illegal. That has not been repealed by the Supreme Court. And, you know, there are times when that's the best way to begin to get attention if there's no other response from a school district.
Carol, last comment real quick.
I just wanted to say, to thank everybody who worked so hard to bring this together, and that I'd like to see a conference a year from now that would reach to Virginia Union and Virginia State Union and bring those professors and those faculties to the table to work on this. And I'd like to end...
Definitely.
Pardon?
Yes.
Oh, and I would also, since Mr. Trent talked about Governor Stanley, I wanted to end on a really positive moment here, because we had another governor, Governor Linwood Holton, who, when Judge Marriage issued his busing order, Linwood Holton and his family made a decision to send their children to Richmond Public Schools and to the schools that were in their district. And so there are famous photos of that. And when we were talking about the price that gets paid, you know, when you take these stands, I'm just going to read one little quote from Linwood Holton for the end of the day here. And it said that he maintains unapologetically that there is nothing he could have accomplished as a U.S. Senator that could possibly have brought him more distinction or personal satisfaction than the controversial decision he made as Virginia's governor to send his children to the public schools. And he said, and quoting Holton, he says, "A career in the Senate, no matter how distinguished it might have been, could not have possibly brought me the gratification I received from just one comment made by an old black man while I was touring Southside Virginia. Something made me speak to that old gentleman. He was bowed, and he appeared to be really old, certainly in his 80s. Linwood Holton is now in his 80s. He indicated that he wanted to say something to me, so I leaned over to hear what he wanted to tell me. And in a soft, dignified voice that I will never forget, he said, 'First governor of all the people.' Nobody has ever topped that one. And so I think we have a good legacy to build on here.
And a good conclusion as well. So I really appreciate, on behalf of all that's organized this, your commitment, your diligence through the whole day. Really do appreciate it. And want to thank Gary and Bill and all the rest of the speakers and moderators. If we can just give them a round of applause for being here. Lastly,
I'll send you those cards.
they're going to catch a flight here, so they might take off. But our presidents, heirs, and Michael Rao, our deans, Jim Narduzzi, who was here earlier, and Chris Walter Thomas, who's here, our colleagues, Cheryl Shakeshaft and Kate Cassida, and others, Renee Hill of Virginia State University for help with the video. And also just a couple last thanks here is the students. If we can give the undergrads here a wonderful round of applause. And we couldn't have done the Center for Civic Engagement. Adrienne Piazza, I don't think she's here somewhere, but she's awesome. And lastly, Claudia Mills, Claudia, if you can stand over here, our assistant in all this, worked tirelessly to make this, and also the staff here at the Jepson Alumni Center, Jean and Ray and others, they've done a wonderful job of coordinating nearly 350 people that have come through here today. We capped last night off at 270. I think there were at least around that in the room. We capped today's off at 360, 370. And so I think that at some point there was, throughout the day, we definitely had that. And finally, all of you, I just can't thank you enough. Please fill out one of those questionnaires. Go to our website where you register. We're going to have a listserv. We'll have the videos up there, and we'll continue this conversation with you. And if you want now, we can go into and have some beer and some wine. So thank you so much.
We have one quick little what's going to happen next that Tom doesn't know about. This truly would not have happened without one single individual, and that is Dr. Tom Shields bringing us together. So he doesn't know it, but he's got a little gift of our thanks.
Yes, we could not let this day pass without acknowledging the person who had the idea, who asked someone, hey, John, I'd like to have coffee with you. I want to talk with you about something I've been considering. And then one thing led to another, and then the fearsome foursome here, and that's kind of what we called ourselves over the year, met. But it was Tom Shields who had the vision. It was Tom Shields who provided the leadership. And last night, Gary Orfield, I thought, made a very touching introduction, to Genevieve. And I agree with what he said. I'm an old teacher too, and I've retired in a way, but one of the great joys of being a teacher, as both of you know, is coming to know some of the greatest people on the face of the world. And one of those wonderful people is a former student of mine, Tom Shields. Tom, thank you for who you are, and on behalf of the Fearsome Four, thank you for the leadership, the joy. I tell you, most of our meetings really didn't have a lot to do with the conference, but we enjoyed laughing. Tom, I'm going to present this to you.
Last comment here. Gary was Genevieve's dissertation chair, I believe, right? And John was my dissertation chair. So the dissertations can amount to something, okay? So they just don't get socked away. No way. Bring the other guy. And if you were following, the U of R lost today with some pretty harsh technical fouls. So if you'll read that story. But thank you so much. Thank you, guys. So we'll return into the have some drinks. Thanks.